Okay, everyone, welcome to Malware Freakshow 2. So here's the agenda for you. We're not going to really walk through each bullet by bullet, but just one thing to note is that this is a continuation from a talk that we did last year at DEFCON 17, and we wanted to dig a lot deeper and expand it into some various different classes of malware, but also show you some new things that are going on in the world of malware development. So we're going to spend a lot of our time during this presentation during the sample analysis. So just keep in mind, so there's going to be a lot of demos. We have 4 demos for you this year. So a little bit about us. I'm Nick Percoco. I'm the Senior Vice President and Head of Spider Labs at Trustwave. I have around 15 years experience in information security. I built and lead the Spider Labs team at Trustwave. Some of my areas of interest are targeted malware, attack prevention, mobile devices, but really from a business and social impact standpoint. And this is Jibran.
Hi, I'm Jibran Ilyas. I have been in this industry for about 8 years. I recently got my master's from Northwestern University, and when I'm not doing work, I'm actually doing work, which is anti-forensics, artifact analysis, and real-time defense. So, turn it over to Nick.
Sure. So, to go over introduction here. So, basically, we had a very busy year. As a team, we visited over 200 environments, 200 incidents, and that spanned about 24 different countries. So we had hundreds of samples to pick from, and we worked together to pick what we thought was the most interesting pieces of malware that we solved in the last 12 months, and present those to you for you here today. So we have some new targets, and so if anybody attended the talk last year, we talked about the target environment, showed you how the environments work from a technical standpoint. We're going to fast forward a little bit past that and really describe just the environment at a high level and spend a lot of the time focusing on the malware itself. But the new targets we have are a sports bar in Miami, an online adult toy store, International VoiP Provider, and a U.S. Defense Contractor. So one thing to note that we realized during the preparation for this talk is that malware developers were very busy over the last 12 months updating and making enhancements and making changes to the malware that they had been developing. Really, it's many improvements they made to avoid mistakes, and we're going to go into those in a lot of detail in this presentation. But we were really chatting and thought maybe they saw our freak show last year because we pointed out some flaws, and they seem to have improved them over the last year. So what is a malware freak show? Basically, the bottom line question sort of answered there, but basically, we have access to breached environments. Now, these are actual environments that were confirmed breaches. Very important information, very valuable information, very valuable data was taken out of these environments using malware. And so really, historically, smash and grab was used, where an attacker would break into a website or break into a physical location and steal data. They just take the data and run off with it. Today, they don't do that very often anymore. What we found is that on an average of they spend an average of 156 days within these environments. So this means that they hack into a say e-commerce site, and they'll be on that e-commerce server in their database for an average of 156 days before someone catches them. So that's something really, really important to keep in mind. Also, when they're in that system, they have a lot of time to explore. And so they run into business systems that are not the run-of-the-mill systems, maybe they're custom developed, and they have a lot of time to develop their malware and craft them to target those specific environments. And that sort of leads into the next bullet there, is that custom and targeted malware is now the norm. It's not the exception. I think when we were doing cases, say even investigating cases like 5 years ago, smash and grab was the norm. And then we started seeing things ramp up. And nowadays, when we go out into the field, it's basically every single case has malware involved with it in some form or fashion. So basically, the reason we're doing this freak show is basically to gather information, perform analysis on each piece of malware, and then the real benefit is to learn about the sophistication of the authors, and so and learn about the sophistication of the current threats. And so the whole bottom line goal there is to rethink the way we alert, detect, and defend in these environments. So what I'm going to walk through, before we get into the demos, I think it's important to walk through what we feel is sort of the anatomy of a successful malware attack. Now what we did is we took a look at the malware that we saw that was successful in the last 24 months and sort of came up with sort of a blueprint. Like if you were to sit down and decide, I'm going to write a piece of malware and I want it to be successful, not just make a lot of noise and crash things and a lot of bells and whistles goes off, but you want to have something that's a targeted, custom piece of malware that's going to be highly successful in getting data out of an environment. We put together sort of the steps here that we thought were what the malware authors were actually using. So we're going to go through this go through each of these steps here. So step one, we have the authors have to identify a target. And so you're not just going to sit down and write a piece of malware with no target in mind. And so there's a lot of information out there. There's intellectual property, there's bank account information, there's PII information, there's HIPAA information. There's a lot of information out there that attackers could focus on. But in the real world, or in anything, the end goal is for someone to get money, right? They're not just going to write a piece of malware and unleash it. You may, but a lot of the cyber criminals and the organized crime groups want the cash. They want to get cash in the end. So the two big focuses that we see is credit card data. That's one piece of data they're looking for, and then also ATM and debit card data. Now, in the credit card data world, the data exists in clear text in many locations and environments. It's not supposed to be in clear in all environments after it's been used, but we often find it is, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But basically, the cache itself, you sort of see this chain that's on the screen there. That's sort of what I sort of call the malware food chain. And basically, the cache is at the end, right? So when you have track data, which is the data that's stored on the back of your credit card, when you have that data in your possession, you can go and clone a card. You then can go and commit some sort of fraud, right? You go to a store, you buy a plasma TV. You now have a plasma TV in your hands that you bought with a stolen credit card. But then you could either use that for your own use, but in most cases they want to get cash. So then they have to go and sell those goods to somebody else to collect the cash. In the ATM and debit card world, the data looks very, very similar. There's pins that are associated with ATM cards, but the data itself is basically identical. But the cache is much closer to the criminals. They get a hold of ATM card numbers and PIN numbers, and they can go to a machine and take out the cash. They don't have to find a buyer for that. And so we hear about large or organized crime groups who go and they'll hit a large number of ATM machines all at the same time, and they'll literally suck cash out of those machines, and now they have that cash. No one could, they don't have to worry about going on the street and finding a buyer. They know they have that cash and they can move on to their next operation. So that's where you've identified the target. So it may be a bank, an ATM network, or an organization that takes credit card information, may be your target. Now developing the malware, so really we break these things down into sort of the big three. These three functions are basically going to help you obtain the data in the most efficient way. So a keystroke logger, a network sniffer, and a memory dumper. And so we're going to go through those. I'm not going to talk to detail what those are because when Jibran does some of the demos, we're going to touch on the network sniffer and the memory dumper. Everybody here probably knows what a keystroke logger is. It records keystrokes, but they're using this, but the attackers are using this in a little bit different way. And so I'll just touch on that real briefly, is that when the data itself is being inputted into a system, the data itself is being inputted via a keyboard type device, a swipe device. If anybody ate here at one of the coffee shops or someplace and you saw them swipe your card, that data is actually being input into the system just like you would if you typed it in. It's just being read off the mag stripe and input in the system. Nothing really special is going on. And so then we also sort of have their sort of disk parser with a question. We often don't see that. Now there is data sometimes stored in the system, but it'd just be easier to take the file and leave. The persistent types of attacks are going to use things that are going to try to access data when it's being used in an active state. If you think of a system that is obtaining data encrypted, it's releasing data encrypted, it's storing data encrypted, what better way of obtaining that data than through things when it's either on the network in the clear, if it's in the memory in the clear, or being entered into the system in the clear. Some other design considerations, naming convention. Blah.exe is not the best name to use if you're trying to be stealthy in an environment. And then choose something like svc host.exe. That's much better. Most IT administrators that are looking at their task manager are not going to notice that as something out of the ordinary. Also, slow and steady wins the race. The attackers and the attacks using malware that we see are very successful. They don't jump in there and make a lot of noise and start doing a lot of damage. They're going to stick around for a while. The malware is going to run and just collect data and siphon it out of the environment. And then, of course, persistency. When they reboot a box, you don't want to have to reinstall your malware. You want to be within that system and maintain persistence through many, many reboots. And then data storage as well. You got to make sure that the data you're collecting is not going to fill the hard drive of the system. So here's step 3, basically infiltrating your victim. So we have a couple different ways. You have basically the physical way, and we see these attacks. You walk up to a computer, you stick a USB key in, and it basically puts the malware on the system. That's a physical way. The easy way that we often see is sort of remote desktop and default passwords. We see those all the time. Now the malware itself that's being installed has complex properties. The attack vector is very, very simple. And it's something that should not be there, but it's that we see that hundreds of times in many environments. And then you have the Uber way. You have basically the O day. And we do see that from time to time, but in most cases the attackers are going to use vulnerabilities that are rather old. Things that have been around for a very long time, and basically they're just available there for the attackers to take advantage of. Now, finding the data, the software we found holds the secrets, right? If you're on a system, you're looking to find out where that data is stored within the environment. The task manager is a really good tool. You can see the processes that are very, very busy. That usually is a place where there's data being processed, and that's where you can then hook your memory dumpers into. And then the folders, the processes folders, temp files, we still see those containing a lot of data. Configuration files that contain debug parameters. You turn the debug parameter on a system, and sure enough, it starts logging all of the activity that it's doing to the hard drive. It's typically there for someone to troubleshoot it, but it makes the attacker's life pretty easy. And then, of course, the wire. In most environments that we run into, even financial institutions, the data on a local network is often not encrypted. Now, it's encrypted when it goes across the internet to other locations, but when it's on a local environment, many organizations don't feel that it's important that they encrypt that data as it's being transmitted between systems. So that's a big place where you can find data. Then getting the loot out. Basically, once you try to get the data out of the environment, most of these environments have little to no egress filtering. So you don't have to worry about just trying to, it's just limited to, say, port 80 or 443. But that doesn't mean use 31337 as the port you use to send that data out. Don't reinvent the wheel. Use what's commonly available, common internet protocols. And because really, the IT security professionals that are going to look at those firewall logs are going to look for freaks. They're going to look for things that look out of the ordinary. If you're sending your data out of port 80, they're probably not going to notice it very quickly. The last step here, basically covering your tracks in obfuscation, we find this is rather sometimes optional, right? From a successful malware attack. Like I said earlier, we found the average of these attacks lasted about 156 days. That's a long time for someone to be in the environment before someone noticed it. So trying to be covert and trying to cover in your tracks, not always extremely important, but it can help. Now, some notes though, don't be clumsy. This is successful, something to take away as far from the successful malware writer has to put within their malware. Basically, crashing systems, that's sort of bad. Filling up disk space is really bad, and
filling up disk space, you might get away with, because a lot of the clients that we see sometimes actually aid the clients. We've seen an instance where the attackers were kind of filling up the disk space, and guess what the IT guys were doing? They're installing another terabyte hard drive, and then another one, and then another one. And that's not it. So when they spend enough money, like $300 on hard drives, they're like, yeah, let's delete the 2003 accounting data, 2004. And finally, they picked up the phone and said, hey, Trustway, we need your help. So it's kind of a note there.
Yeah, and then command prompts popping up. We've seen some malware that's poorly written that does those types of things. That's just stupid, right? You have things popping up. We actually received a call from somebody who said, I think there's something going on in our system, and it was because the mouse was moving around by itself. So making things obvious to the end user, even to someone who's not technical, is not a good sign. But then you want to mess with the investigators and the cops, right? So you don't want to make things easy. MAC times, you're going to modify those to match the install dates of a lot of the utilities or the files that are in Win32. We're going to show you this. A lot of these new attributes here came into play in the last 12 months. They started doing these things. Obfuscating output, we're going to show you that in some of the new malware samples. Packing, basically packing the bag of tricks using packers. You don't have to pack the custom malware you wrote because AV is never going to detect it. But if you're bringing along some other utilities, you have to actually pack those in order to really be covert in some fashion. Basically automating, but randomizing events. And we're going to show you some things that are going on in some of the latest pieces of malware. But most of the malware writers today are basically lazy, right? So they're going to install this malware, and they don't want to keep coming back. And so they want to watch a website or watch an FTP directory and just collect the data as it flows in after they've installed this malware in many environments. So randomizing those events can help avoid detection as well. And then rootkits. So that's one of the latest pieces we've been seeing in this type of malware is they're getting away from executables and diving down into using rootkits. So now we're going to jump into some demos. And so like I mentioned, we're going to spend a lot of time, big portion of the presentation in the demo aspect of it. So let's talk about this environment real quickly. This is the memory rootkit malware. We gave this guy the code name Captain Brain Drain. It is basically